Australia had a sharp awakening. Australia was essentially anaesthetised to China's ambitions and its subversive activities because it was anaesthetised by the cash that was flowing to Australia from exports and business to China and Chinese investments in Australia. It's the biggest story in the world. Donald Trump is a factor in that story. But the biggest story in the world is China's ambition and its pretty healthy progress in becoming the dominant power.
When we think of countries trying to show the world their power and influence, we might think of muscular shows of force like China's army parading its newest nuclear weapons, missiles, and lasers in a military parade in Beijing last week. But then there was our government scrambling to out-deliver China with a tit-for-tat over, of all things, cars for a tiny but crucial Pacific nation. Today, international and political editor Peter Hartcher on why the region Australia long thought was least important is now the region that matters the most. So Peter, I'm very excited to have you on today because you've written about something I hadn't really thought about before. This is competing nations trying to woo another country to their side through gifts. Like, we know this happens, but first off, I have to ask you, is this a normal thing? Like, does ASIO have a gift-giving unit where spies are like tracking the credit card statements of Russian and Chinese agents to like see who's giving like Seiko watches or bottles of wine?
Well, it's secret and operates in secret, so I can't really tell you definitively. However, I would be shocked if they did not.
Wow. Okay, well, let's get into it because there was a battle of dueling gifts that's been taking place behind the scenes. So who gave the Solomon Islands more cars? Was it us or the Chinese government? And why have we all been scrounging around to see who can give more vehicles to this tiny Pacific nation? Good question.
Well, so the big picture is that Australia is competing to try and defend the status quo in the Pacific Islands broadly, to prevent China's intrusion and China's ambition to build a military base on one or as many as possible of the islands. And as part of that, both the Chinese and Australian governments are vying for influence, and they use different means to do that. And one that just perfectly encapsulates the nature of this competition and bidding for the favour of Pacific countries is that for this week's events in the Solomon Islands, tiny country, fewer than 1 million people, but covering a large expanse of the Pacific Ocean in a strategic location, our Chinese friends decided that they would give 27, but as part of a larger gift of 40, a brand new fleet of SUVs. The purpose being because Solomons is hosting the Pacific Islands Forum this week, which is the big annual political hoo-ha of the region, right? There are 18 members in the Pacific Islands Forum, including Australia and New Zealand, but excluding China and the US. And the Chinese desperately want to influence, control as much as possible. And the Australians, trying to keep them out, said, well, if they're going to give 27 or eventually 40 cars, we're going to give 60. I think it's now up to 61 for the same purpose. Now, first thing you'd say is, well, that is, as you say, Samantha, a small gift. Is that really going to change a country's calculus about alliances? I'd say two things. One is it's a smaller part of a larger pattern, and both countries are giving much more than that. Our Chinese friends, according to politicians on the ground in the Solomons, have been offering bags of cash to politicians in the Solomons over the years to woo them and to win their country's recognition of China over Taiwan and other favours. And this is a competition that Australia cannot enter. Australia tries to avoid paying bribes, and in fact we have laws against it. So this is something where Australia can't compete. So it has to compete in everything it can, including giving these cars, which are this week being used to ferry around the leaders and dignitaries who are in the Solomons, in the capital of Honiara, for the Pacific Islands Forum.
And we know this is important because I think you've just written in the battle for influence in the Pacific that the Solomon Islands is considered one of the Pacific nations least simpatico with Australia. So obviously that's a real issue. But elsewhere, just on Tuesday this week, Vanuatu knocked back a security pact that would have given Australia a veto over Chinese investment in the country's critical infrastructure. So what happened? Because I think a lot of us saw the headlines just last month when our defense minister, our foreign minister, and our Pacific minister traveled to Vanuatu and announced in a lavish ceremony atop a volcano, no less, that they had concluded negotiations for this agreement. So what happened, Peter?
Well, the volcano must have erupted because it might have been stable, predictable, and lovely a month ago, but now it's blown up. And Anthony Albanese has left his trip, has left Vanuatu behind with no deal. The specifics we have yet to uncover, but the big picture is clear. The big picture is that the Chinese government has waged a rearguard action to undo that arrangement, and that they seem to have succeeded. Remember that really the Solomons was when Australia got its first China shock under the Morrison government, when we all woke up one day and discovered that the Solomons had signed a security pact with China.
A secret one, right? Like it
had all been done in secret.
Yeah.
The Solomons people didn't know, neither did anybody else. Only the Solomons leadership and the Chinese knew about it.
This is the worst foreign policy blunder that we've seen in the Pacific since World War II.
Since then, Australia's been fighting a rearguard action itself, trying to scramble to keep as much influence as it can. Penny Wong describes this as a permanent contest.
You can't do anything right now about countries being bought by China.
I have said very publicly, Carl, we are in a permanent contest in the Pacific. That is the case. I think that Australia lost its opportunity for there not to be permanent contest by the neglect of previous governments.
And if we're not, we have a Chinese takeover, and if we do, we can. The government's unspoken but absolutely serious aim is to prevent China building a military base anywhere in Australia's approaches. Now, it comes to Vanuatu, is another country where our Chinese friends have made serious inroads. This is the second arrangement, as you said, in just a few years now that's fallen through, an attempted arrangement with Vanuatu. So Vanuatu and the Solomons are countries where Australia's really struggling to make any advances, where our Chinese friends appear to have veto power in preventing those governments from entering any new arrangements with Australia. So this is a serious problem that Australia is suffering right now, and how far the Chinese are able to advance their goals of building a military base is an open question, hence Penny Wong's line, permanent contest.
And this might be a really obvious question, but ultimately, I mean, we know that Beijing for a very long time has been trying to set up a military base. I mean, that's its goal in the Pacific. Is that essentially to do with the battle over Taiwan? Like, is that what that's about at the end of the day, or is it about other things as well for China?
This would be an advantage for a Taiwan scenario, but it's also an advantage, in fact, it's an essential for China's long-term aim. Xi Jinping has made it very clear that he is aiming for domination, and he doesn't qualify that. He's aiming for domination not just of his near periphery, not just of the Indo-Pacific, but the world. Let's just be absolutely clear about this. He does not qualify it when he says, and he has said from the moment he was made the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, when he said, I will put China in a position to take the initiative and to assert dominance, not qualified dominance. So what's the point? Why is it imperative to get a Chinese military base into the Pacific, South Pacific? In the event of any contingency, Taiwan contingency, or any broader pattern of dominance, it's important that the US not be able to operate from the Australian mainland. Now, as you know, there are a lot of US interests and bases already built and facilities in Australia, and Australia is in the process of building a new submarine base on the west coast, specifically for the US to use for its long-range nuclear-powered submarines. And there are other facilities underway as well. And in the event that China and the US go to war, which is a real prospect, whether it's over Taiwan or some other issue, the Americans want the ability to be able to operate from Australia. So that's a critical reason that the Chinese have military bases in Australia's northern approaches in the South Pacific to prevent US operations from the Australian mainland. And the second reason is it isolates Australia. It takes us out of the fight. Australia cannot advance to our north to assist in, say, a war over Taiwan or anything else. If the Chinese have got a military base in the places that geography hasn't changed, Samantha, since World War II. The Japanese Imperial Army built major bases in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands so that they could cut Australia off and deny the US the ability to operate from Australia. It's exactly the same calculus because the geography is the same.
Yeah.
And I'll just add one final thought about China's ambitions. There's no limit to their ambitions, and they have built 3 new dual-use bases in Antarctica on Australian territory. Australia lays claim to 42% of Antarctica, and the Chinese have built 3 bases on Australian territory.
How is that possible, Peter?
They just go ahead and do it without consulting the Australian government, without getting permission, without resort to anything like, any of the niceties of diplomatic existence. Just went ahead and built them.
Okay, I'm very confused by this, Peter. I know we'll have to discuss this another time, but I'm a bit confused why we're buying cars to combat China's influence, but we're not just like knocking down their scientific bases.
Well, Australia had a sharp awakening. Australia was essentially anaesthetised to China's ambitions and its subversive activities because it was anaesthetised by the cash that was flowing to Australia from exports and business to China and Chinese investments in Australia. As you know, it's by far our biggest trading partner, and that had anaesthetised us. And it was 2017. It took the Sam Dastyari affair and the decision by Malcolm Turnbull that it was finally time for Australia to just do basic things like crack down on Chinese influence peddling and other activities in Australia and attempts to bribe Australian politicians.
This is the second time Sam Dastyari has emotionally resigned his party jobs.
And we are still trying to fully recover our sovereign ability to figure out things like, well, how do we deal with this Hydra-headed China plan that is seeking to dominate us, but everywhere else as well. It's the biggest story in the world. Donald Trump is a factor in that story. But the biggest story in the world is China's ambition and its pretty healthy progress in becoming the dominant power.
Okay, well, let's get into what Anthony Albanese is going to try to do next week, because he's due to sign a bilateral security agreement with another nation in the Pacific. And of course, this is Papua New Guinea. So what is that agreement all about, and how important might that be to our security, assuming it comes off? Because obviously we thought the Vanuatu one was going to come off. It didn't. So tell us.
Nothing should be taken for granted.
Yeah,
and the
that's
Pacific Islands are pretty clear about that. They don't want to be taken for granted anymore. We ignored them to our eternal shame for decades. We Australian governments gave a bit of aid, but otherwise largely ignored them and thought that the Pacific was the least important region in the world to us, before realising now it's actually the most important. So that agreement is a security agreement that the Australian government and the Papua New Guineans have negotiated. They've yet to announce the contents of it. I have had senior ministers in the government say that it's extremely important, that it's a very big deal. We'll find out. But the Papua New Guinea has the biggest population of any of the South Pacific nations. Obviously, it's very close to the Australian mainland. It's where the Japanese set up in World War II and were seeking to set up. So it's pivotal, and at the moment, gratefully, Papua New Guinea and the other big South Pacific power, which is Fiji, are well disposed to Australia and Australia's interests. So that's looking a bit better than the very shaky, volcanically interrupted Vanuatu arrangement.
My goodness. And you mentioned there, of course, that Australia had neglected the Pacific nations for a very long time. We've had this wake-up call, and Albanese is obviously very active in this space. He's really trying to, assert Australia's dominance or influence, I guess, there. But I wonder whether his diplomats are equally on board, because you wrote that Pacific Island Affairs Minister Pat Conroy has been heard telling Australian diplomats to stop chasing postings in traditionally glamorous cities, because what they do in the Pacific matters most. So I'm just wondering whether this message, this reality check has filtered down.
I'm sure that there are, Pat Conroy is, I'm told, used the expression, stop trying to get to Paris, think about getting to Port Moresby instead. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of Australian diplomats who joined the service or are in the service with ambitions to get to Paris ahead of getting to Port Moresby. But Pat Conroy's point is, you go to Paris, you can't really influence big picture outcomes. You've got to do, there's important stuff to be done, but you're not going to change the course of Australia's future. In the South Pacific, you absolutely are, or you're going to fail. Either way, it really does matter, and that it is the cutting edge for Australia of protecting its own sovereignty, and that's his point.
And Peter, just to wrap up, I don't want to end on a sort of doom and gloom moment, but I do have to ask, really, how can we compete for influence in the Pacific against China? Because I'm just thinking brass tacks, China's economy is way bigger than ours, even though it's been slowing. I think it might be the second largest economy in the world. We're about the 14th, I think. So tell us about this, because we did provide more cars to the Solomons, as I understand it.
Well, and Australia has a number of pretty solid advantages. It's long been the biggest aid supplier to the region. You're right, the Australian economy is a bit under $2 trillion a year, which makes it a lot smaller. It's the same size as the Russian economy, by the way. And if you look at Russia, you can see that if a country puts enough effort into its military and security, it can actually throw its weight a pretty long way. So Australia's not an absolutely hopeless tiddler here. Australia's in a strong position.
Right.
Also, a really important point here is that the Chinese system is very good at so-called elite capture. That is, capturing the leadership group of a country through, friendship, lots of lavish travel, gifts, where it can get away with it, as we know it has been doing successfully in the South Pacific, bags of cash for politicians. It's less successful capturing the hearts and minds of the people, the citizens and the voters in these countries. So culturally, for example, almost all of them, English is the second language, in some cases the first. We also know that they are democratic nations, that they are mainly Christian countries. They play either NRL or AFL. They're the primary sports, which is really important. So the churches, the sport, the democracy, and the historical ties and the history of Australian engagement and investment is a big asset. And that's why China is making such a big effort to try and overturn that traditional advantage. Now, can Australia do more? Is there more to be done? Yes, it can. And what's been happening is the Australian government has been trying to do these bilateral deals, from the hub through the spoke to various Pacific countries to stitch them into the Australian system. The most recent successful large one was, a large deal with a small country, Tuvalu, which was a very successful deal. And it gives them, this is fascinating, it gives them the right over time for all of their population to relocate to Australia. They are a country that's already starting to disappear under the Pacific Ocean because of climate change and rising tides and storm swells. It's only tens or hundreds of people a year can move to Australia, but over 30 years, their entire population under this deal could relocate if necessary. They call it a dignified relocation, is what the Tuvaluans and other Pacific countries call it. So Australia literally offers them a lifeline and an alternative place to settle, to bring up their families. The whole thing. We're talking about the migration of an entire country if it needs to, in return for which Australia gets a veto power over Tuvalu's ability or freedom to make security agreements with other countries, in other words, China. So Australia is really playing this game as hard as it can.
Okay, well, it starts with cars, and we'll see what the next tit for tat is, I guess, right?
Absolutely.
Watches, I don't know.
Well, there are, on the national level, there are football stadiums.
That's right. Aren't we offering PNG a team, or?
Yes, in fact, there's a deal underway to establish a rugby league team from Port Moresby that participates in the Australian League, and that's well underway.
You know what a big sport fan I am, Peter, so you know I'm across this.
This is likely, Christianity is important in Papua New Guinea, but rugby league is even more important. And so this is a big deal.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your time.
Always a pleasure, Samantha.